Thanks as always for listening to Fluff and Crunch. In this week's episode, Chris and I discuss a thorny issue in tabletop role-playing games, that is character death. Both planned and unplanned, the sort that comes up just from bad dice rolls, and the ones that really fit the story. Remember to like and subscribe, leave a comment if you're on YouTube, join our Discord. There are links in the notes whether you're listening to the pod or you're watching us. And as always, thanks for giving us your time.
Should be shot.
Wait, say that again?
Whoever invented WebP should just be straight up murdered.
Or better yet, a little more socially acceptable, beaten with a rolled up newspaper in public. So you don't, you just shame them.
Or Zoom and or make it a thing which everyone can use. That's the issue we have. You know, WebP's fine, except that all of those things that don't accept WebP, and therefore you can't use it.
Yeah, I'm constantly I use Preview on my Mac to just change. I'll just turn it into a PNG or a JPEG. But see, you had to, this is relevant. This is a perfect segue into our topic for today. Talk about a quick launch here. You needed a picture of death. Is that like is that what's his face? Is that Sean Bean's character after he got killed?
Oh yeah, maybe it is.
Looks like it. Why did I forget Boromir? Boromir, yeah.
I always get confused by Boromir because growing up, Boromir was a half-naked barbarian dude with a horn and a horn
giant
helmet.
Beard.
Because that's what he looked like in the Bakshi cartoon thing.
Yeah, the really terrible one.
Well, I was a kid. That was Lord of the Rings.
You thought that was all that in a bag. That was wonderful.
So then, you watch that again and again and again. And then when they did the film and he had armor and clothing, I'm like, it's not Boromir. I have no idea which is more accurate because every time I started reading the descriptions in the books, my eyes glossed over and I started skipping.
Yeah, we can complain about Tolkien's writing some other day, and people can start commenting nasty things about that comment about right now. Along those lines, you should like our stuff because our stuff is great. You should subscribe to it so you can get our great stuff regularly. If you're watching this on YouTube, recognize that this was originally a podcast and it's still a podcast, so you can subscribe to that as well. All the links are down in the notes. And at the end of the video, we have some suggestions for other YouTube videos, other episodes, that is, that we think would be useful for you to watch, player or GM.
And we have a Discord, so join it because more and more we were a 2D20 podcast, but I don't slash YouTube channel. I think we are anymore. We are a role playing.
Yeah,
we are an RPG podcast. We talk about role playing games, and today we are specifically talking about death. Well, character death, not
NPC death, because that's what that's one of their purposes. We're talking about character death here,
and not the character of death. We're not doing a spin-off onto Discworld.
Or
probably the best character.
The guy from Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, with whom they played like Battleship and
also Twister, the best character in that thing as well.
He was the bassist, wasn't he?
He was the bassist, yeah.
In that horrible third movie. But anyway, we will not go there. We'll not go there. Death. Okay, death. And I mean, this can be, I think that we can address this from a player perspective, but also you and I tend to come to these things from a GM perspective because you and I tend to be the forever GMs. But we also tend to be the forever GMs by choice because we actually enjoy GMing more than playing. So what's the big deal with death? I mean, let's go ahead and queue up some of our ideas for what makes this an issue. I think it's really obvious in different ways, but where are we coming from? We say, what's the issue with character death, player character death?
I mean, I think the main thing is that from a player's point of view, because from a player's point of view, it's bad. If your player dies,
player dies. That's a real problem.
I do that all the time. If your character dies, as a player, you are gutted. It depends on the thing. In a one shot, it's not the same thing. But if you've got a character that you're invested in and you've put time into it and you've played, and that character dies, that's always going to be bad. Now, depending on sort of how bad it's going to be is dependent on the person, but also like how the character dies. And this is where you come into the kind of one of the things which, and we'll get into the GM stuff later. Sometimes your character dies just because of bad rolls.
Yeah.
you know, like really early on in a low level D&D thing, because actually your character's much more likely to die. You know, you get killed by a goblin, gets a lucky roll and crits and kills a level 1 character kind of thing. That's not satisfying. Now, on the flip
No.
side of that, your character dies that early on. Oh, it's early days, maybe you just re-roll a new character. But I think the main thing is that character death can be bad for a player because, you know,
Well,
that's the whole point. You're playing a
I mean,
character.
as a player, your avatar in the game world is your character. And so when the avatar disappears, it's like, your Pac-Man got killed 3 times by the ghosts and you have to put in another quarter, you know? And that's so character death, my immediate thought is, it becomes it unplugs your connection as a
Yeah.
player with the game. And I think we can look at it so that's definitely the case. And you bring up two different call it two different categories or two different general circumstances, either satisfying or unsatisfying. Either of those create the issue of you being unplugged from the game world at that moment because your character's dead. But then there's the issue of the satisfying versus unsatisfying. You're absolutely right that, yeah, especially in older versions of D&D, getting killed by a goblin was really easy, at lower levels, or getting killed by something, and you just level up and then you go encounter something like more serious, like a roper or whatever, and you're dead. Poor rolls. I mean, when probability just takes a dump on you, to be crude about it, and you just can't seem to get anything right at a night or when you're at a session, that really sucks. It's unsatisfying. So I want to talk about how do you think from a GM perspective and a player perspective you can deal with when the situation deals you an unsatisfying death. And I also want to talk about, is it possible, I think it is, to make it satisfying and therefore actually okay. So I'd like to address the unsatisfying bit, that side of it first.
Well, one thing that's gonna help or lessen it is the system you're playing. Because one thing we have in, like you said, go back to D&D. D&D is an easy one to talk about. Prior to, I have to go way back old. It used to be if you hit 0 hit points, you were dead. That was it, dead. And it was very difficult to bring back players because, resurrection spells and so on don't come up to a
Right.
much, much higher level.
Right. And if you're that low level that you, especially like the low level, goblin gets you or the pit trap gets you, the chances of you having the resources or the contacts to go find that person, that high level cleric or spellcaster, is pretty low. That
Yeah.
could make for an interesting quest, but what do you do with the moldering body? That's another issue.
Well, we'll get
But
into
then what do
that.
you do with that player during that
Yeah.
time?
Yeah. We'll get into that. So obviously in the 5th edition, now you have this idea that, you go to 0 hit points, but you don't die, you are dying. And a lot of systems have things like this where your character kind of drops down and they can't do anything, but at least they're not like dead. And it gives the chance of the rest of the group kind of a chance to basically bring them back up. I mean, this isn't a million miles what we see in certain computer games, like team computer games, where someone will go down and someone else goes. As long as someone is up and can revive the others,
Yeah.
you can carry on playing. Now, on the one hand, it does kind of remove the element of it kind of removes the element of risk. But on the other hand, it doesn't. You still, like, if you go up against and fight a dragon when you shouldn't be, you're all still going to die. And if all of you are, and if the thing also, once you're dying, you could still be like, eaten and swallowed whole, and there's still rules for critical death and things like that. So,
Yeah, it's tough because putting aside satisfying versus unsatisfying, yeah, that's an important distinction. That it used to be that whatever your health, hit points, whatever you hit 0, you're down, or you hit 0 and you're unconscious, and then there's some negative rating you get to, and then you're dead. That was the call, like the next innovation to provide some kind of a stopgap. Now, on the one hand, like story wise, we see lots of examples of the hero, part of a team of heroes, and one of them is dropped and is there, bleeding or whatever, and someone comes over and, grabs them and pulls them back and then administers first aid or things like that. Okay. So story-wise, that has that has legs. Like that's call it like story valid, if you want to say that. I think where a lot of games have gone wrong is that there is no grab the hero and drag the hero out of danger and then spend time save. It's like you walk over and you touch them, like you poke them, and whoop, they just come right back. The idea that I mean, think about it. I understand we have a game that has Dungeons and Dragons. We're already into silly and made up stuff. But the idea that you can do first aid in the same amount of time that you can pull the trigger of a gun or swing a sword in the vast majority of games it's one of those like things that you're not supposed to look too closely. And that is there not to serve the story so much as to serve the game so that all players can stay active. And I think the problem is, and this is, again, I'm fine with beating on D&D left and right, that the current versions of the game make it that it's almost impossible to get killed. So you really have to deal with character death because the chances of you actually dying are slim to none. But back to the whole like unsatisfying. What makes it unsatisfying? You brought up one thing, just a poor rolls.
I think it's the thing. I think
rolls.
when it's randomness or when the stakes didn't really matter. And I think actually that's the important thing. When there are stakes at play and there's a chance of your character dying. If your character dies, well, those were the stakes.
Yes.
And lots of fiction will have a character die, or, and this is the thing we do not see in role-playing games, really badly wounded. We will see a lot of things in a film where one of the heroes goes down and they are dragged out of and they are they survive. They are healed, but they're not dead. Not many games, some games do that. Like you go down and you're down and you can be healed afterwards. Obviously with D&D is different because you have magic healing, which just, throws us big span in the works. But even lots of other things. And again, it's this break between the story kind of thing where in a film we would expect to see someone be wounded and go down, but they can be healed for the next scene. And some games do that, but there are plenty of things like, because you said, well, in a game, you don't want to be sitting there doing nothing.
Right.
Because most games do not have a facility for it. What do you do if you're a player and your character is out of it? I mean, one thing I really liked about Infinity was that idea that you role played the onboard AI of the person on your left kind of thing. So if your character went down, you weren't doing nothing. You had something else to do. But that's literally one game that is doing that kind of, and you can't really get that into lots of other ones. So I think you got that awkward thing of, what is going to happen. And actually, partly it depends on the kind of game you're playing. I mean, one game we have talked about lots and never actually done a review for, and really should do the amount of times we talked about, is Alien, where character death is so prominent in that game that the rules basically say, or a lot of the adventures say, look, if these characters die, just pick one of the other ones.
Yeah.
Now, so there is a solution. A character dies, you pick up another character, but then actually you're back to what you said is the issue as a player is you've got a disconnect. You were playing this character, that character dies, they're gone. Now you don't know the personality of this other one, so then these become meaningless cannon fodder that you're not interested in. But then is it really about the story? Because I would only do that in a one shot, and I've played Alien twice, and in both times Scott and Brian have had their characters die, pick up a second lot of characters who have died, and they're on the third lot, because actually then it's the overall story. We're not focusing on individual characters,
right?
And so the story is still fun. It tells what if you did it as a film, it's a film, although the fact that the main characters keep dying probably isn't a great film.
Yeah, and that makes for a very different kind of experience where you're less interested in your character or the character you are controlling at a given moment. You're far less interested in that. And I mean, I think there are advantages and disadvantages depending on what you're trying to accomplish. But you're right, if you have an ensemble, like let's say you have a group, and the assumption is that, hey, as people get knocked off, you're just going to take over another one. I think the character related story, or the story as presented through characters, the potential for having that develop and be rich falls apart very quickly
Yeah.
because players, okay, here, oh, Ron's dead. Well, you're Buck now. Two scenes. Oh, Buck's dead. You're Susie now. And eventually, it's like Subaruk. They just kind of smoosh into just this
Yeah.
same. There's no personality. There is no character play. So that's a problem. I think that though the bad luck cause, how do you deal with that? Like let's say you're playing the more traditional, I think like the typical RPG where people are playing their characters and there's a degree of investment by the players in the characters, and there is at least, if not spoken, certainly an unspoken expectation that they're going to play this character for some period of time, and there's a degree of ownership. And when something just unlucky and dumb happens, you know, every once in a while, you know, this is GM, like you ask
Yeah.
people for a role and you go, you think to yourself, damn it, I shouldn't ask for that role. What was the point of that? And then someone rolls of like, you know, their dice explode on the table and their character dies. How do you deal with that? What do you think?
I mean, I think you've got a couple of different ways to deal with it, and partly it does also depend on the setting. So fantasy setting gives you a bunch more options. Really, what I think you need to do is put that to one side for the rest of that session, and I think you need to talk to the player, because the player might be perfectly happy to like, okay, no, my character's dead. They died in it's going to depend on how they died, but you know, they died in a relatively cool way. I don't mind that they died. I'm happy to roll a new character. And whether it be, you know, this is a person, you know, you turn an NPC into a player character, or, you know, it's someone else that comes along, or someone from someone's backstory. You know, there's a whole bunch of, you know, there's a whole other episode of how to introduce a character mid-campaign. We could do a whole podcast on that. But that's one option is, no, my character is dead. I'll do a new character. You got the stupid option of I really like this character, but the character's dead. Can I be the character's, you know, brother, sister, clone, person from an alternate reality? You know, it's a naff way of doing it. But if the character's dead, but they want to keep playing the same kind of character, that's an option, not a very good option. And then in some kind of things like fantasy settings, or hell, Star Trek, because they did it with Spock, it might be that the player's like, well, I really I don't want to let this character go, but I accept that they just can't come back. So, you know, can the rest of the players go on some big ass quest thing to bring them back? Now, I mean, you know, Star Trek, perfect example of that. That is Star Trek 3. The entirety of Star Trek 3 is a
Yeah.
long, drawn out, not very good film to explain how, having killed Spock
They
very
unkilled him.
dramatically and poetically in a very iconic scene, we're going to bring him back, because they accept, like, you can't just turn up at the next film and go, you
Mm-mm.
know, hey,
You know
no,
what's
there we
something?
go.
Let me
Hey, I'm fine. He's got
Something
a,
that's
you know,
interesting about that actually is let's say that was a role playing game. And so you start off the campaign. Everyone makes their, let's say Star Trek doesn't exist. It's some clever group of people like us come up with it. And they decide to run this very cerebral kind of eggheady sort of, you know, campaign that's Star Trek the motion picture. And then they go, let's have some more action. And one of the players is like, oh yeah, it'd be really cool if I, like, you know, maybe person colludes with the GM, or the GM comes up with it, or something comes up, like here in the moment at the end of the Star Trek 2, the second campaign or whatever. They you know, the ship is it's in this horrible situation. So one of the players is like, okay, I'm going to go do this, and everyone looks at him. He's like, no, I'm going to do it. I'm going to sacrifice myself, and it's this really awesome moment. And you're like, oh man, my character's dead. That sucks. Oh, you know what? Tell you what, I'll play. Let's have a quest, like you just said, to Shaggy Dog, bring me back, and I'll play David. I'll play Dr. David Marcus for a while, and you can knife me at the end of that. You know what I mean? Like if you think about that, that actually works out well because it introduces a a disposable character, Dr. David
yeah.
Marcus, and it introduces also a throwaway character that everybody was interested in. I know it does. You point in balloons. I'm not going to point. I'm going to sit on my
Why
hands.
did not do it mine?
You're in England. We're, I don't know. Anyway, um, you know, you got Savick, who's the ever interesting character that they don't really ever do anything with. Okay, so that's an interesting way. And here, you know, when you got to talking about in the moment, I was originally thinking, like, how do you deal with the character death, the unfortunate character death, the stupid character death in the moment? Um, you could, this is actually something upon starting a campaign, and I'm not into like safety tools and questionnaires and all this like make human interactions unnatural. I can't stand that stuff when you're among friends.
But
But what?
but yeah,
But
yeah. It's a,
however,
it's
you
a useful
could
question.
you could say at the outset of a campaign where you're talking to your players when you're starting a new thing, hey, if what do you guys think about like if your character dies or if it comes to a point in the story where it seems like story-wise it would make sense for your character to leave. And does anyone have a general sense of like where you stand on that? Because some
Mm.
people are cooler about that. You know, just a few weeks ago, my buddy Steve, his character died totally unplanned by the dice, made sense. So it wasn't stupid. It absolutely made sense in a story. It's not something that would happen in a movie because it was sudden. And of course, whenever the hero dies, there has to be foreshadowing or has to be something heroic like Boromir and that kind of thing. No, a troll just hacked his head off, and he was like, okay, because that happens in
I mean,
fantasy.
there are times where people die, and you are like, "Oh, shit, I wasn't expecting that."
Yeah,
And as
exactly.
much as people pan them, a couple of the more modern Star Wars films. I mean, when Han died in Force
It was so
Awakens, I didn't see
stupid.
that. I,
That was
well,
so
I didn't
stupid.
see it. I didn't see it coming.
No, it was so stupid.
And in Rogue One, like I remember saying to Annie, a bunch of the heroes will probably die.
Yeah.
But when they start killing them and they keep on killing them, you're just like, oh my goodness,
That's why I
gracious.
liked it so much.
Um, but then there's no coming back from that. But the other you can do is when you've killed someone, you can have consequences. So a really good example of this is Buffy. So in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, let's say season 5, she dies at the end of one season. To be fair, she died in season 1 and got brought back straight away.
See,
So
multiple
forget that
times.
one.
Yeah.
But when she died properly and like she was dead at the end of the series and she was buried, they did a funeral and everything. Then they bring her back really early on in the next series. Then they wait a couple of episodes. But the whole rest of that series dealt with the consequences of the fact that like she was in heaven and she was happy and now she's miserable and other things that when they brought her. So having made that decision, we're going to bring the character back.
Yeah.
Firstly, that she didn't come back straight away, but then having decided to bring her back, you then have consequences. And again, fantasy games make that easy. Okay, you just you travel into the underworld and you make a deal with Death or Hades or whoever to bring that character back, and now you owe Hades a favor. That's probably bad. That's going to come back and bite you. Um, so there are definitely things you could do in a game to say, right, well, okay, they died, and the character. I really want this character back. Brilliant, you can have your character back. But now there's going to be consequences of that. It's not going to be snap your fingers and they're back again.
But how then that's true, and I like that, but how does that deal with the question of what do you do with that player while the rest of the group goes on a quest or does some or maybe it's something in the moment,
Yeah.
maybe someone Angel of Death shows up and is like, yeah, I'll come back for a favor in the future, or whatever. I mean, there are ways that you could do that. Back to I just wanted to say one thing about the whole how as a GM you deal with the unexpected, call it the stupid death, which is just like the death caused by bad mechanics or just mechanical happenstance. I actually think in that moment, you stop and you think to yourself, wait, does this make any sense? Like, is this pleasing for the story? I'm not one of these people who's like, that's what the dice say, and you shut up. I don't work for little plastic polyhedrals. Nobody does. It's stupid. If everyone commits and says that's what we want to do, well, that's a different thing. That's your table. That's cool. But the way I've dealt with this when it's like that, and I would put the sudden mechanical happenstance under the high potential for not very satisfying. And so what I'll say is, okay, let's stop for a second. What do we as a player? What do you think about this? What do I think about this? Does this make sense? And if it doesn't make sense and it's really dissatisfying to everyone at the table, I will retcon it and I will add some kind of a consequence or some kind of a thing like, okay, you're not dead, but here's this
Yeah.
thing that happened. So it reflects the fact that probability just gave us a whack on the head, but I'm not going to let the dice undo. And there are times like this last one with Castles and Crusades. Yeah, that it came out of nowhere, but we looked at it and we're like, okay, let's roll with it. And this is what it now looks like story-wise to reflect that. But like I said, you stop, you figure it out. What do you think?
I mean, I definitely think there's room for that, and then I'll go on to another thing I was going to say, but that yeah, in case of actually you've rolled it and this is the role you've got, and you're like, no, that's just dumb, right? Oh well, we'll bring it back a thing. They're not dead; they're severely wounded. I mean, there are plenty of games where actually it's incredibly difficult to get like dead, or the characters have some kind of meta currency they can spend to stop it happening. So it's like, well, look, you're dead, but you've got your meta currency. So if you spend that, you're not dead. I mean, when I've played both the Age of Sigmar and both the various Warhammer games I was playing earlier this year with Scott and Brian, there was quite a few times where their characters basically were going to be straight up dead, but they had meta currency they spent, which turned basically being dead into they're really badly wounded.
Right.
And so they always downplayed it. The other thing you do, like I said, it is highly unlikely that a player rolls so badly that they die. Now they could do saving throws in D&D. Most of the time, an unlucky roll kills a player. It's a GM's unlucky roll, which means you can fudge your rolls. And I've done this loads. But when I've got two players, if one of my players goes down, it's like, oh well, I'll just fudge that a bit. So again, it totally depends on the situation. If one of the players is going to be completely obliterated and it's fine because it's the end of a session and it's a one shot, or like I'm playing Alien, I don't fudge my rolls. I don't need to. But if we're in the middle of a long campaign and those characters have a purpose and it doesn't fit the story, then I will tweak it to leave them on less health or something else. But yeah, why not
Yeah.
wound them rather than killing them?
Yeah, I think that's it. There are plenty of ways like that. Okay, I'm going to take the probability, the dice, and you're right. It's usually you, the GM, roll like a critical, and then you roll max damage, and then you roll in the critical hit table, and the dude's head comes right off, or something horrible like that. I think you take that strong nudge from the dice that you did not expect, and you spin it into something interesting but not fatal in the story. Interesting, challenging, problem creating, but not character ending if it doesn't make sense. Now, what about satisfying character death? Is there such a thing?
I think there is, but it's almost always, it's got to be serving the story. Boromir dying where he does in Lord of the Rings is fine because there's 9 characters. He's a bit of a douche. He gets this, but he gets this super cool heroic thing. But then him dying there sets up, the others' distrust of people from Gondor. It sets up Faramir's arc. It sets up his dad killing himself. If Boromir doesn't die, lots of the rest of the story doesn't pan out. Boromir dying gives a kick up the backside to Aragorn to go to Gondor. There's so many things in the case of that death serves the story in so many ways. If that's a role-playing game, and some poor guy's running 9 players and one of them's Gandalf, but 4 of them are hobbits. But if that GM goes, no, it's all right, Boromir, you stay alive. A lot of stuff is a lot less satisfying. That's kind of it's at the end of the first book. It then sets off everyone going on their different ways. So that works. I think character death's better when it's at the end of something. So, it's at the end
Sure.
of like this, big chunk of campaign, and
Like
then
a
you're going to be
chapter.
taking a break. Yeah. The end of a book, the end of a thing, the end of a big sequence, the end of an arc in your campaign. They can do something big and heroic. Everyone remembers them, and then next time they're playing a different character. That's I think when it's satisfying. It's when it's in the middle, when
Yeah.
it doesn't serve a purpose. If someone dies in a way that gives you an end goal or achieves some kind of thing, or someone dies heroically killing the big bad guy or stopping the parties, everybody else gets away, or if Luke had died blowing up the Death Star, well done, Luke, you're a
Yeah.
hero. That's those kind of things. But
I think you're right. And I think
that's satisfying.
those come up, I think, as you as GM and individual players are just getting into, and for lack of a better word, like feeling the story as it develops, maybe a player says, maybe you have a player who has to, their work schedule changes or they move, whatever. And, so they're not going to be able to come to the group anymore. So you're like, let's come up with a cool way for you to ride off into the sunset.
Yeah.
That can do it. Um, but I think oftentimes the satisfying death is a planned one. However, in the moment, if things start going south, or the way an encounter or situation plays out really starts pointing to a circumstance where there's a high chance for mortality for one or more of the characters, then maybe a player decides, okay, I'm going to do this. I'll accept that. And then I think in a circumstance like that, you as the GM actually, you give them the opportunity to go out well, to do something really cool in the story. I remember, it's funny, I haven't thought of this in ages. Like 40 years ago, which is a terrible thing to say, I think, I was playing Heroes Unlimited, Palladium's superhero game, and I was playing this. I don't know what we were doing, but I was my character, whatever. And there was like, I don't know, it was like a nuclear reactor. So there's some giant thing was going to explode and like blow up an island or something like that. And so I just decided, I was like, I'm going to sacrifice myself to save the island. So I told the GM, I'm like, I'm going to fly down into there and do this, that, the other. Can I do that? And everyone's like, but your character will die. I'm like, that's okay. It'll be cool. It'll be cool. And I actually remember having to convince the other players at the table that there wasn't something like wrong with me, that I was eager to sacrifice my character because it would be cool. So I think that in those moments, you as a player, you as a GM, you need to be open to the possibility of maybe playing fast and loose with the rules a little bit to enable that big thing. I do want to say one thing about, and this blurs the line between the sudden and unsatisfying and the satisfying. Rather, you take the sudden, which could become unsatisfying, and you turn it into something satisfying. I heard a comment from on the Dungeon Craft YouTube channel from Professor Dungeon Master, who does really good stuff. He mentioned something about, in a game that he's writing, if your character, and I may be butchering this, but it's something along the lines of like, if your character dies, your character doesn't die until the end of the combat encounter.
Right.
That's such a simple, like, boneheaded thing. Like, okay, yeah, so you did die. Yeah, you're dead. Your guts are falling out, but you go out, like, basically you go berserk, or you keep on fighting until the end of the encounter, and then you collapse. So you don't.
Yeah.
And in a way, that's like what you just said. Instead of there being a chapter in the story, though, you die at the end of the combat encounter. You drop at that, just when the dragon's head hits the ground, the hero collapses right after it, even though you quote unquote died mechanically 3 or 4 rounds, 5 rounds before that. I think that can be a way.
Yeah, I definitely think like either a lot of games or as a GM, you just house through it. Like the idea of a heroic sacrifice, either way that, like if you die, you are dead. You are going to die at the end of the combat. There's no way you can come back, but you get to keep playing it out. Like Boromir style, you're fighting and you're still fighting, but you're going to die. You're a god. Or the other thing of actually being able to do something like what you said your character did. I want to do this really cool thing. So I want like bonuses to my roll.
Yeah.
And I want extra dice or, but I die at the end. I go guns blazing all out, but I'm going to die.
Yes.
It should be a player option.
Like drive it like you stole it in that moment and be satisfied with it. That would be really, that's a great way as a GM, when you have that sucky, that stupid roll, you can turn it into something cool by allowing this.
And then sometimes it is nice to just have the punk death, just to like, just the unexpected Game of Thrones. I wasn't expecting that person to die. Oh well.
But you know what? But I think there's when I read the first Game of Thrones novel, I was surprised, I was peeved, but I was also kind of compelled by Sean Bean's death, because
I should have seen that one coming. Really.
I didn't. Well, I know I thought that like the trope of like the last minute rescue or something like that, like the fact that it was like he went through with the whole thing and there it went, Ned Stark. And And I was like, dude, that was really gutsy. That was really, and that was kind of cool. Like I can live with that. Um, but yeah, I think sometimes, but that's different though than Ned Stark gets up in the morning and while he's taking a leak, slips and falls and whacks his head and dies of a brain hemorrhage. And you're like,
Yeah.
that was freaking pointless and stupid.
I think the important thing for a GM is to realize that sometimes just because the dice say a character dies, it doesn't mean they have to.
Correct.
And sometimes characters should be allowed to die in super cool, heroic, and
Yeah.
crazy ways because it fits the story. But yeah, but I think a lot of the time, I mean, you can't just remove, and you could do, like, if playing something like Paranoia, you don't have character death, but um, you know,
Yeah.
you want to have the stakes, you want to have the threat of characters dying, but you want to have the threat of characters dying in the times where there's actually a threat, not just like we're fighting some goblins.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you don't want players to be really stupid and go, I'm going to go and fight 20 goblins by myself
Like,
because they're only goblin. Well, no, then you deserve to die.
or like it would be really stupid if you were playing a game like a Princess Bride type of situation where you're climbing up the cliffs of insanity and you fail a climb check and you plummet to your death. Like that's just lame.
I think that's, again, that's the kind of thing that comes with experience, is it? Because you can have the player, just fall down a bit and grab hold again.
Lose some equipment.
Yeah, lose some equipment. They can, take some strain. Or again, so much of this depends on the system you're playing.
Sure.
Did they need to get to the top in a certain time? But just, oh, you failed, you fall and die. I mean, I did that. I was playing a kind of semi-futuristic Borderlands sort of style thing a couple of years ago. And at the end of it, after they'd broken these people out of prison or whatever they were doing, and they were jumping into the spaceship, Brian failed his jump roll and plummeted to his death. But it was a one shot, so it
Who
was
cares?
funny and it didn't matter.
Yeah. I
I was
think
like, oh well, you fail, you're dead.
a couple of
Didn't
things. I
matter.
think you hit it. I think the key with a mechanically sudden and unexpected death is you either you either retcon it because it's totally stupid, but you respect probability as part of the game enough to inject some kind of a consequence. So you don't die, but you're knocked unconscious. So you're out for the rest of this encounter, or you lose some key piece of your equipment, or something like that. You as the GM have to be light enough and flexible enough in the moment to make those rulings and not be slave to the rules. I think on a player side, you need to be willing to work with your GM, obviously,
Yeah,
and
100%.
accept that sometimes what's most interesting to you. Seriously, think about this as a player. Is it most fun for your character to win all the time, or for you to be part of a cool story, that you as a player to be part of a cool story creation and use your character in an interesting way? And we all get emotionally invested and connected to characters you make. I understand that, um, but I think that an interesting death can definitely be, can add to the story. And you're right that Star Trek 3 was kind of weak. Star Trek 2 was so strong at the end. But then, like, let's bring him back, or at least they didn't say, "Hey, let's have his twin brother Spack become, part of the big." Oh, here he is. He has a mustache, but it's him. Um,
I think if someone can't let go of their character, that's fine, but you need to have better ways of dealing with it, including they just straight up don't die in the first place.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but yeah, it needs to be a conversation, and sometimes players do need to die because
characters.
if yeah, every time
You
if
can't play with your
characters
players if
if,
they're dead.
if players think their characters can't die, they play
Yeah,
their characters weird.
yeah,
So having that, oh, my character can die, and that's the trouble. Most people play their characters as they're indestructible, they can't die,
yeah,
and then they die, and they're like, oh, that's a bit unfair. It's like, well, you play them like an idiot.
yeah.
So it is helpful when there is threat and risk.
Without
Otherwise, certain
without
things don't work.
tension, without risk of true loss, there isn't the tension. And then the story doesn't actually there's a level of satisfaction that disappears very quickly if you don't do that. You're absolutely right. So character death needs to happen sometimes when it happens, but it should be satisfying and it should make
Yeah,
for good story moments, not oopsie daisy, you slipped and fell on broke your head on a piss pot.
there you go.
There we go. All right. So remember, like, subscribe, Watch the other videos that you're seeing pop up around me as I'm talking here.
Discord.
Discord. Join the friendly Discord. Thank you, as always, for listening to Fluff and Crunch. You can join our Discord. You can subscribe to the podcast. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel, all through the links in the show notes. Thanks again. Have a great day. We look forward to talking with you.